Stay standing if you wouldn't mind, if you're able, for the reading of God's Word. Becky kind of talked us through it. I got to remember to stand over here so you can see the screen. Yeah, awesome. A little bit different message this morning. I think of myself as an expository preacher, not necessarily topical. Tony's preference as well is not necessarily topical or sticking with what's going on in culture, that kind of a thing, but we're having a slight departure from that, which is cool. Similarly, I shared this at the men's breakfast, something similar to this. So he asked me to turn it into a sermon, and so 45 minutes later, here we are. I'm just kidding. It's not 45 minutes. Just trying to break the tension a little bit. All right, here's what it says. Romans 12, 9 through 12. It says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Detest evil. Cling to what is good. Love one another deeply as brothers and sisters. Take the lead." This is from the CSB, I think. "Take the lead in honoring one another. Do not lack diligence and zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be persistent in prayer." Father, our hearts this morning are yours. Do surgery, do within them all that you need. As you have worked on me in this, I pray as well that others would be open to the same. Whether we're married or single, Lord, that we take this passage about unity within the church, and Lord, that we would apply it and overlay for our marriages as well. It's in your name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. So Chris and I, we got married in 1996, back when the internet made these dial-up noises and phones couldn't take selfies, and you had to rewind your movie before returning it to Blockbuster, or you faced this fine that could bankrupt a young couple like this, right? We were young, we were broke, but we were madly in love, and we were just as prepared for marriage as we were for filing our taxes. But like a lot of couples, we stood at the altar and we said those famous words with all the confidence in the world: for better, for worse, for richer, or for poorer, with no idea how quickly poorer was about to kick in. Now, if you're married, here's the thing: you have your own version of that season as well. Like, remember your first apartment? Anyone? Very few of us were able to move into homes, but we had that as well. How about this? Your first discussion about how to fold towels correctly. Ooh, that happens. The shock and horror when you discovered that this person that you've committed a lifetime to respecting insists that the toilet paper be hung with the end of the roll towards the wall. That wasn't my wife. We were in complete agreement about that. If you notice the bottom one, it says teens live here. It's just placed on top because that next 4 seconds of hanging it, it's just too much. Mom, I can't even. Mom, just can't even right now. But we all started there, didn't we? Hearts full, eyes locked, vows were spoken. But something happens along the way. Between the bills and the ball games, the diapers and the deadlines, the passion starts to flicker. And the teamwork, it turns into task lists. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we stop delighting in each other, and we start just kind of surviving together. Ministry also has a way of testing those vows, especially the financial ones. I remember 1 month so tight, we were counting coins in the kitchen like it was a blackjack table in Vegas. I mean, we're just like, got enough? I think I have enough. We definitely did that to buy pizzas at Toppers, $2 for a large cheese. Yes, I'm that old. It was actually a pretty good deal even back then. Hoping in those days that we had enough to not only pay the bills, but that we could feed ourselves and that the hamburger helper would stretch. And that's also when I learned a very important truth about marriage. Hamburger helper does not come with hamburger. I didn't know that. I was like, it's just a box full of crappy noodles. So you add the hamburger. It's terrible. Am I allowed to say crappy on Sunday morning? I don't know. I said it. I am the youth pastor, so. And yet, the cool thing is somehow we made it work. We laughed a lot. We dreamed big, made the most of our 800 or so square foot Section 8 apartment and secondhand furniture. We were scrappy and in love. But somewhere between planning a ministry, raising kids, and chasing down God's call, we stopped cherishing each other. And what started as forever and always slowly turned into we're just trying to survive. And the reality was we weren't in crisis, but we were coasting. And coasting never takes you anywhere worth going. And that's really where the story begins. Not with a fight, not with a fall, but with a slow fade. A season in which we were doing ministry for Jesus, but neglecting the gift that he had given us and each other. So Romans 12:9, as we've looked at it, it says this: let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. There was a season of life in which basically we turned into two overly polite co-workers running a small business called the Elliott children. We'd high five over lunch packing victories, and we tag team bedtime like pros, but the spark was gone. And when we did finally get a date night, we'd end up sitting at dinner like, when are you going to get those house projects done? Or who's going to pick the kids up from soccer practice? And the truth, we didn't just stop dating. Again, we stopped delighting in each other. And that love that once felt carefully tended and cultivated had gone quiet, buried under years of noise and neglect. The laughter and connection that we used to enjoy kind of slipped out the back door unnoticed, like a toddler with a marker and an evil plan. You ever had that happen in your house? Just they're gone with the marker, and you're like, where are they? They're in their bedroom, and what is that? But you see, for us, this season was a wake-up call. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. I remember one night after a particularly romantic evening of folding laundry in silence, it hit me. We weren't acting like a married couple. We were basically just co-CEOs of a kid-based startup with zero profit margin and the world's worst hours. And the problem wasn't just busyness, it was forgetfulness. We had forgotten that marriage isn't a contract built on shared responsibilities. It's a covenant. And it's rooted in relentless love. You see, God didn't design marriage to be a running checklist of who's picking up the kids or paying the electric bill. He designed it to reflect his never giving up commitment to us. But here's the thing about love. Can't survive on autopilot. It's not sustained on good intentions or shared responsibilities. Love needs to be nurtured, chosen, fought for. And somewhere along the way, we stopped doing that, both of us. And that's why this verse in Romans 12, it kind of hit me one day. Let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Because that kind of love, the real kind, it isn't romantic or sentimental like you see in the movies. And we watch a lot of Hallmark movies. But that kind of love is rugged, it's resilient, and it refuses to settle for just going through the motions. And you don't always feel it, but it can still be there. You see, we had slipped into something that was far less than genuine. And what started out as a covenant had drifted into convenience. And when love isn't real, when it's polite, but hollow and disconnected, it leaves both people starving for something deeper. And that's where we were. Men, since it's Father's Day, here's your reminder. She's not your carpool buddy. She's not your roommate. She's not your emergency contact at your prostate exam or your pain in the butt. You like what I did there? Thank you, Becky, for laughing. First service, no men laughed, just the women. But men, she's your partner. She's, again, your covenant companion. So there are these three phrases here in Romans 12:9, and they're not random. They form kind of a litmus test for the health of our love. So we're going to kind of walk through them quickly. The first one is this: let love be genuine. Now, that word genuine here in the Greek literally means without hypocrisy, not pretending, no performance, no saying I love you while quietly resenting the other person, the person across the table. It means love that's raw, that's honest, that's not masked. And for me, that meant asking this hard question: do I actually love Kristen well, or am I just doing dad stuff well? Because there's a difference. People at that time, 10-year mark in our marriage, would have said, oh, Mark's a great dad, right? But that wasn't enough. There's a difference. It's easy to keep up with appearances, to say the right things, and to do the expected duties. But again, that's not genuine love. Genuine love delights in the other person. It notices them. Genuine love pursues them. It listens. And I wasn't doing that. I'd been managing, not cherishing. That's why Ephesians 5:28 says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. The second part is this: abhor what is evil. And this word abhor means to hate with intensity, kind of like Ohio State fans and Michigan fans, right? That would be a good definition of abhor. So what kind of evil are we supposed to hate in the context of marriage? I think it's the kind of slow, subtle evil that creeps in when we're not paying attention. The bitterness that grows when apologies are withheld, or the selfishness that shows up when we silently keep score of what the other person's doing or not doing. That pride that says, I've already done my part, now it's your turn. No one wakes up one day and is like, let's wreck this marriage. Because it's a slow drift. It's a cold shoulder, the unspoken frustrations, the quiet distance that starts rotting things from the inside out. And Paul says, don't tolerate it. Don't coddle it. Hate it. Call it what it is and throw it out. And then he tells us, of course, what to do. He says, hold fast to what is good. Now, that phrase, I love it in the Greek, hold fast, it literally means to glue yourself to. It's a picture of clinging to something with all your might. I think of when Peter called out to Jesus as he was going down under the waves, you know. Jesus didn't like gingerly pick him up, you know, with two fingers. No, I imagine Pete was like two-armed on Jesus' hand, like two hands, like clinging to something. And in marriage, it means refusing to let go of what God says is worth fighting for. Grace, forgiveness, humility, laughter, shared purpose, friendship. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, we hold fast to what is good. So when I look back at that season in our marriage, that 10-year mark, here's what I see. For me, my story, I had let our love grow distant. I tolerated attitudes and habits that were quietly corrosive for both of us. And I stopped clinging to the good things that used to define us. And so Romans 12:9 has become for me not just a verse, but it would become eventually for me a diagnosis, but not until things got much worse. Because before anything can be rebuilt, something has to sometimes break. And that's exactly what happened. So, wow, Kristen and the kids were out running errands. Packed up everything I owned, which wasn't much. Packed up everything I owned in our two-door car. And I left a note taped to the microwave. And I walked out. And in that note, I wrote a lot of really, really bad things. A lot of things that weren't true. Some that were true that we would have to work on in our marriage. But I wrote words at the end that still echo with regret. I wrote the words, I'm done. I didn't slam the door. There wasn't a big fight. Just quiet. Numb. The kind of silence that doesn't need volume to tell you that something sacred has been lost. And, you know, it wasn't that I didn't love Kristen. I did. I do. But I couldn't see us anymore. Not underneath the weight of the diaper bags and after-school schedules and an exhaustion that runs way deeper than just needing some sleep. We were buried beneath the years of surface-level conversations and missed moments and the slow drift that neither of us knew how to stop. And in my brokenness, I made a devastating choice. I didn't fight for her. I gave up on us. And I walked away. And in doing so, I crushed the heart of a woman who had stood beside me, who had carried our babies, who had prayed over our family, and bore more weight than I could ever have realized. I shattered something sacred, not just a promise. I shattered a person. And I'll never forget the look in her eyes when someone who vowed to love her chose to leave instead. Or what it feels like to be the kind of person who caused that kind of pain. But that kind of oneness in marriage, it only survives when you fight for it, when you choose that person over and over again, even when it's hard. And I hadn't just drifted from our marriage, I abandoned it. I had no idea how or even if I could even find a way back. So Chris and I began the journey, a year's worth of counseling. And we just began fixing things. There was no epiphanal moment followed by angelic choirs and perfect communication. It looked more like a construction site than a fairy tale. Messy, loud, probably a safety hazard. And after that counseling for a year, we had long, raw conversations where we stopped pretending and we started listening. And somewhere in all the emotional drywall dust, we came back to that part of Romans 12:10. Love one another with brotherly affection. You see, that was a shift for me. That verse exposed something in me. I hadn't been showing honor. I'd been showing silence, withdrawal. I wasn't cherishing Kristen. I was just coexisting with her, managing the relationship like a task list instead of valuing her like the gift she is. And the more I sat with that verse, the more it collided with another one that I had learned years prior to that. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. You see, that kind of love doesn't flinch at sacrifice. It doesn't wait for her to go first or keep score like a bad game of marriage monopoly. But a verse like that, it lays down pride. It steps in. It goes first. It leads the way, men, that we're called to. It doesn't try to change anyone else but ourselves. And in leading the way that I'm supposed to cultivate the climate for change. I'd ask myself, was I loving Kristen like that? Was I giving myself up for her, just giving up? So a change was made. But first, I had to make that change in me. You see, this was big for me to recognize this in our marriage counseling, but husbands, we're not called to fix our wives. We're not called to micromanage. We are called, however, to win their hearts with the kind of leadership that looks less like a throne and more like a towel and a basin. And that kind of love doesn't come from entitlement. It comes from the example of Jesus. It's not about control. It's about sacrifice. You see, Jesus didn't love the church because she earned it. He loved, served, washed feet, and he gave his life. And men, that's our model. And let me be clear too. In all this, I would have to remind myself, in marriage and in ministry, my wife wasn't made as my assistant. She's equal in value, equal in worth, different in roles, absolutely, sure, but not in dignity. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, we know how it is to get easily caught up in the chaos of raising kids, practices, school, church events, homework, teenage meltdowns, right? And somewhere along the way, you start operating like co-managers of a small, emotionally unstable corporation. Chris and I lived that life. So we started dating again, not because we were floating on clouds, but because we were barely treading water, and we needed to learn how to like each other again. That's what it means to love each other with brotherly affection, liking each other. To remember that we were actually friends who used to make each other laugh on purpose. So enter Friday date day. Every Friday, we carve out time to connect. Phones down. No talk about bills or who forgot to defrost the chicken. Friday date day. just us laughing and dreaming and sometimes passionately debating about where to eat. Spoiler alert, these days it's usually Bel Air Bistro. I'm just saying, they have a really good smothered chicken. You got to try it. It's amazing, and the price is perfect. And over time, I began to realize something, that honor doesn't always show up in dramatic declarations. They don't have to be these big, huge gestures, especially when your wife prefers Diet Coke over a bouquet of flowers. That's a win. You see, most days, honor looks like small, quiet choices that say, you matter, with your actions and with your words. It's listening before speaking. Still working on that one. It's praying before reacting, choosing grace when sarcasm would be so much more fun. And that's what it means to outdo one another in showing honor. It's not about competition, but it is about Christ-like commitment. And some might chalk a strong marriage up to good luck, but in my experience, there is no such thing as luck. That's for Brian Flanagan, my Star Wars quote. It's intentional, it's God's grace, and it's your effort working together with your spouse. And here's the warning. I wish Chris and I had kind of paid attention to this earlier in our marriage. I made a blog post about this not too long ago. When you make your kids the main focus of your relationship, you may give them what they want, but you'll likely lose what they need. You see, your kids don't need to be the center of your world, but they need to see who is Jesus. And, believe it or not, the clearest picture of him in your home will be how you treat your spouse. Your kids are a gift, but they're not the glue, because kids are not designed to hold our marriage together. That role belongs exclusively to Christ and the covenant that you made with your spouse. Because the goal in marriage isn't surviving the schedule or raising polite humans. It's about serving together in one mission, being united in purpose, and pointing your family to Jesus. And that's where Romans 12:11 lands with force. He says, do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. So maybe the biggest threat to your marriage isn't infidelity or finances or communication, conflict. Maybe the biggest threat to your marriage is a slow spiritual drift. You're not rebelling, but you're not pursuing either. You believe in Jesus, but he's not shaping how you live, how you lead, how you love, and how you train your kids in matters of their faith. Romans 12:11 says, do not be slothful in zeal, but fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. And you see, that's not a suggestion. It's actually a wake-up call. You see, before we even knew what ministry would look like for us long-term, for Kristen and I had to wrestle with something bigger than romance. I had to ask myself, can we serve God better together than we can apart? Can we serve God together better as a team than we can apart? Before I proposed to her, I talked to her about ministry. You see, that's the question that shaped our future. And when the answer was yes, I didn't just buy a ring, we made a commitment that our marriage would be more than just a life together, it would be a mission together. And that same question, it still matters today. Whether you're in full-time ministry or not, that question matters. But for us, especially after the heartache that we went through in the 10-year mark of our marriage, because forgetting that mission is what caused us to drift apart. We stopped doing ministry together. We stopped praying for one another the way that we had been. I really believe that one of the greatest threats to our homes isn't outright spiritual attack, but apathy. Casual Christianity that shows up on Sundays, but does not transform our Mondays. And Paul's words in Romans 12:11, it hit right between the eyes. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. And that word fervent in the Greek literally means boiling over, passion that's too strong to keep inside. And I know I don't wake up every morning boiling over, right? Sometimes I just roll out of bed and I want to boil some coffee, I don't know, or hot tea if you're Kristen, hot cinnamon spice tea from Harney & Sons. You want to get your drink and just get going in your day. And that's real life. The call to mission isn't about feelings, though. It's about focus. And what if your marriage isn't missing love or communication or even time? What if it's just missing mission? Maybe you can't relate to the rest of what I said, but maybe this is something that you're starting to think about, like, man, we don't have a shared mission. If we are spiritual beings created for eternity, why am I focusing so much about life here on this big blue playground? What if we stopped trying to fix all the symptoms and instead turn to the source? What if you and your spouse started praying, Lord, what did you put us on this earth to do together? Not just what should we do this weekend, that's an easy question sometimes, but who are we here to reach? And I'm not saying every couple's going to move to Honduras or lead a marriage conference, but I am saying that God has a purpose for your home and it's bigger than you. So what do you do when you realize that you've drifted? You don't need to panic. You don't need a 5-point plan. You just need to turn together, but also turn towards each other. And most importantly, turn towards Jesus. And some of you are there right now. You've been living like roommates. You love each other, yeah, but the mission got lost somewhere between soccer practice and paying the mortgage. You're not mad. You're just tired. And underneath the tired is this ache, this holy discontent that says there's got to be more than this. And there is. It's Romans 12:9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. That's the kind of love that God designed for unity within the church, as this passage indicates, but it's also a kind of love that should be intended for our marriages as well. A real version of love that clings to what's good and fights for what matters. And then verse 10 says, outdo one another in showing honor. Imagine what your marriage would look like if the competition wasn't for who's right or who's winning, but who can honor the other person more. When verse 11 says, do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, and serve the Lord, that's the kind of love that doesn't just survive, but it serves, it moves, it advances the kingdom together. And look, I get it. Chris and I have had those seasons, as I mentioned, where we lost sight of that. We were showing up for everything on the outside, ministry, kids, commitments, but we weren't showing up for each other. And the drift wasn't loud, but the drift was real. And we came back to this. Not just being partners in life, but partners in mission. And when we remembered that, everything started to change. So maybe for you, maybe the next step isn't a grand gesture. Maybe it's just a quiet one. Maybe after the Father's Day burgers are grilled to dad's specifications and everyone's in a food coma, you can just sit together. No phones, no agenda, no distractions. Maybe just pray. You don't need perfect words, just a willing heart. Lord, help us serve you together in a better way. Because marriage was never meant to be just about surviving. It's to point people to Jesus. It's never meant to be just about surviving chaos, managing schedules, or agreeing where to eat. Marriage is meant to reflect the mission of Christ. And what your home might be missing maybe it's not love or laughter or even another date night. Maybe what your home is missing is just direction. It might just be that it needs mission. So what if today was the day that you step into it? Not perfectly, but prayerfully and together.